right? Listen, I'll tell you what, right? We have no problem with mosques being built over here, so long as we can build mosques in Mecca. Yeah, I'd love to see that. I would love to see a mosque being built in Mecca.
So, welcome to my new little series, or sub-series, or whatever you want to call it. In Bread and Rosebuds, I cover a variety of topics on social issues or general leftist interest in under about 10 minutes. The reason for this is to give myself a challenge to my own natural autistic verbosity, but also to help fill the void in leftist YouTube where we don't have a lot of very snappy content. Right-wing talking heads tend to put out a lot of it, but of course it tends to be poorly researched or thought out, so I think we have a chance to one-up them here. Longer form videos are great too, and I'll start making them again as well, but I think this is a useful and needed format. I have a video relating to BLM in the pipeline, particularly in terms of how it relates to Ireland, which will be a recurring theme, but today's subject is going to focus on something maybe a little more British. It's time to revisit Muslamic Rayguns. I decided to make this video after seeing Lonerbox's one debunking the Muslim grooming gang myth that Thought Slime did a shout out to, which I highly recommend watching in tandem to this. Additionally, content warnings for brief mentions of sexual abuse, racism, Islamophobia and all that. So, Muslamic Rayguns is a meme that refers to a video and the subsequent remix of said video, wherein a reporter interviews a poorly spoken young white male EDL supporter, that's the English Defence League. The video is framed in a particular way, and thus has been latched onto by comedians and memers alike, having such a wonderful caricature of a thick, ignorant EDL supporting thug. And honestly, it's hard not to have a chuckle at the sheer level of ignorance on display here, which can be a welcome reprise from seeing Islamophobic and racist concerns presented as more reasonable and generally being mainstreamed. One obvious way to combat mainstreaming of a particular ideology is to associate it with other negative qualities. In this video, obviously, it makes it clear that Islamophobia is very often synonymous with general cluelessness and a lack of education, or more likely willingness to be educated, at the subject at hand. We do reach a bit of a dilemma here though, with there being an undercurrent to the undesirable associated traits here, particularly those relating to class. The man in the video very much appears to be the stereotypical picture of a working class man, and indeed lack of education, as well as his pattern of speech, are additional hallmarks of the popular image of the working class. There is a common stereotype of the thick, tracksuit wearing racist thug, akin to the redneck in the US, and while there is a degree of truth to this, particularly since predatory right-wing movements like to recruit in vulnerable communities and concern troll over economic anxiety, but it can also be a useful image to obfuscate the real issue. Now, the UK is no stranger to poking fun at racist toffs either, like, well, Boris Johnson. But the fact is that the person who is currently in the highest seat of UK government, aside from, well, the Queen, is Boris Johnson. And these working class racists are a lot more likely to meet with consequences than someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's protected by a generous dollop of privilege. But this brings us to another problem, that finding oneself lacking on one axis of privilege, i.e. being of lower social caste than the Tory toff class, does not excuse one to be a twunt to people who are marginalised in other or additional ways. Basically, this is the sort of problem that TERFs run into, a group of mostly relatively privileged cis white women unable to see past the woman part and being complete numpties about other people's issues. Here we get into a bit of a Karen scenario, where some people will claim that the mocking of a person who is privileged or powerful in one way, but not another, is actually mocking them based on their lack of privilege or power. And sure enough, on the front page of results for Muslamic Rayguns is a right-wing rant about the left betraying the working class. And there may be a degree of truth in this in some cases, if the subtext wasn't also, therefore we should round up those muzzies. This puts us in a difficult position, of course, since we need to be able to criticise said Islamophobia and racism while also being mindful of the alienation of the working class. This is where another group of people might become involved, brocialists, class reductionists, taking a similar approach to the right-wing commentators and removing the identity politics from the equation, but are supposedly more genuine on the economic aspect than the right, who use it entirely as a bait and switch. This leads into a term you've probably heard another YouTuber use lately, the socialism of fools. Referring originally to anti-Semitism, a similar concept can be extended to manipulation of the working class to see groups like Muslims as the other, the enemy, the ones taking their jobs. Both of these tactics achieve a similar goal, the framing of racism as a function of the ignorant, unwashed masses and not the wealthy elite, and the framing of economic anxiety as a function of minorities and not the wealthy elite. With the degree of information we have at our fingertips nowadays, it should in theory make ignorance of things like Islam less excusable, but the reality is that things like Muslim grooming gangs are a huge problem get passed off as fact. Debunking them often takes lengthier videos than the average person is prone to watching. Many right-wing talking heads are consciously aware of this, which is why they use intentionally dishonest tactics to muddy the waters. If we are to take a more reparative approach, then we focus less on the moral judgment of the Muslamic Rayguns guy, and while not excusing his Islamophobia, acknowledging the role class has to play in it. For some people, however, the reparative approach tends towards viewing the root cause not as capitalism or deeply entrenched structures, but simply a lack of education, almost implying racism is a natural reaction that has to be educated out. As we can see from the ongoing protests in the US as the time of writing in June 2020, education is very far from a panacea. Various programs designed to educate and reduce bias across the US, particularly Minnesota, have achieved very little. So, this is a complicated problem with potentially complicated solutions, though perhaps quite a simple root cause, if one that's uncomfortable for a lot of liberals to admit to. Anyway, this is a subject I'll probably come back to in future, as I haven't gone into any real detail about Islamophobia or Muslims in general. This is meant to be more of a bite-sized series. I finally have a Patreon up if you want to help out, as I'm always in need of better equipment and funds to do my social work with vulnerable families in the community. You can also make a one-off donation through paypal.me. However, right now I'd recommend checking out some of the links in the description and supporting Black Lives Matter related causes, as I'll likely end up donating much of the money I'd otherwise get there anyway. I hope this wasn't bad for a first effort at a short video. I'll post some recommended videos to watch on this subject in the description over the next few days. Stay safe, salams, and slangafol.